When you're looking in the phone in a way that's different than if you glance at your watch and then reconnect with the child, we're taking our eyes and our attention off of the kids, and we're modeling for them this kind of immersion in devices.
Looking to spend time with that person. Like, the slogan that I like talking about is, how do we like our kids as much as we love them? And sometimes it could be a little bit hard. And I think being able to have situations and doing things with our kids that they want to do is important. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No One Ever. We had an awesome conversation today on a topic that, interestingly, I've gotten more into as I've gotten older, and I wish I would have had more understanding about this topic on reading, specifically within our kids, the younger age. And it's something that I enjoy doing. It's something that I've been trying to work with my own kids and try to help my clients, both in my professional world, but also here in the podcast, of helping parents teach kids how to read more. And I think the topic and this conversation could be really helpful for anyone looking to understand more on the topic of reading and where to go and how to get certain skills and guidance. And I will be speaking with Maya, who is an author. She has written an amazing book called Reading for Our Lives, by a literally action plan from birth to 6, and how to go about things in a structured but yet very relaxed way of teaching kids how to read. And you can have kids that can have so many different issues, and we talk about from the OT type issues that might come about through different forms of deficiencies that a child might have, to how to incorporate it within the social world and then the scholastic world as well. But I think this conversation can really be really helpful. And just a little bit about my guest and why I'm so grateful for her to join us for this talk, and really found her to be really, really helpful and insightful for this topic. Maya is someone that is a literally advocate when it comes to reading, and obviously a book lover herself as well. She does a lot of deep reading and slow writing, which I love that concept, and I think she'll talk about that a little bit as well. Her focus is on helping parents raise kids who thrive and promoting a lit-rich lifestyle for everyone. She has, like we said, written a book that has been really, really helpful, and this can be a great guidance for people wanting to learn how to read more, and also just regarding the topic of how to create and grow the world of reading, especially in the digital world. Please enjoy today's episode. So Maya, there are obviously so many questions I have, both as a parent and as someone that has been working on this podcast and working on parenting for a long time. And I think the first question that comes to mind, I'm curious if we could start talking about, is what's the first question that we should be asking ourselves as parents when it comes to making sure that our kids are headed on the right track when it comes to them reading what they're supposed to, when they're supposed to?
I think the first question parents need to contemplate is, what is reading? So I think people often jump right into reading books to kids and thinking about print and text and sounding things out. But reading is really the combination of two things. And so one is print related. Absolutely. You can't read if you can't match speech sounds that you hear to letters that you see in print. But the other big crucial part of reading is comprehension, understanding those words that you're able to sound out. And a lot of that is built in very early years, and it's built through back and forth conversation with parents. So it's vocabulary, it's ideas, it's content knowledge.
So you're saying it has more to do with the conversations that we have with our kids than it's to do with the books we're going to be buying them. And which I guess goes into the lines of communication with our kids is going to be key for how they're going to be picking up reading. Can you talk a little bit about that comprehension, what you mean, and how we can work on that as parents?
Absolutely. So I think particularly in the earliest years, so when you're first bringing the baby home from the hospital or just have those first moments with them in your arms, you should be thinking about conversation as a part of that relationship. So it's part of building the bond and the nurturing and the care. And the key word to keep in mind is responsiveness. So when they cry, you want to respond. When they coo, you want to respond. And by respond, I mean verbally, as well as like physically holding them and all of those other markers of closeness with children. But through that back and forth conversation and your contingent responses to what they're doing, you are building really important brain infrastructure that will support language learning and literacy learning down the road. And when you speak to the baby and use words and sentences, you're also introducing them to the sounds of English, and you're introducing them to words and ideas that they'll need. And we don't know, it's not like there's a swip that flips, that there's not a switch that flips and they
Right.
immediately understand everything. It emerges over time. So we shouldn't wait till they're this age or that age to start the conversation.
Okay. Now, are there certain things that we can be seeing at certain points within the development of a child? Like, should they be able to either say certain sounds or maybe comprehend certain things, or maybe point at certain pictures and be able to explain whether it's the color, the shape, or what it actually is at certain ages?
There are a lot of well-defined sort of language development milestones. And so people can look to guidelines like the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has a list of ages and stages that's very helpful. And again, the perspective parents should have is that those markers are sort of developed by looking at a large number of kids and sort of averaging it. So kids will be far ahead of those milestones and some will be behind. But I think it is helpful for parents to have that reference point of where kids typically are, on average. And so then you can go into your child visits, those pediatrician visits, and you can have questions because you'll have some idea of what kids are typically doing. And then you can either feel really good about where your child is or ask questions if you feel like they may
Uh,
be behind
I
in some area. The literacy milestones are not as well developed. They aren't as well documented because there's such a wide range of when kids are exposed to print, how much kids are read to. So the information is not as well defined as what we have around those language milestones. So it's important for parents to understand that the language, staying on track with the language milestone supports reading. Again, because the kids who are spoken to more and speak more have better receptive and expressive vocabulary, and they're in a better position to recognize and make sense of more words when they see them in print. But the actual timeline for learning about letters and sounds, all that varies enormously by the input and experiences that parents shape. So parents are usually influential around that. But I would say kids start paying attention naturally to print when they're around like 2 or 3. They can discern the differences among letters, particularly if you're dragging your finger along the text in a book or pointing it out. And so I encourage parents, make letters a topic of conversation when kids are toddlers.
Okay, that is a great idea. So you said a lot of things there I would like to unpack. The first thing that comes to mind is, going back to the doctor's office. What type of questions should we be asking that will help the pediatrician help us understand what our child is going through if there is some sort of literacy or English deficit, if that's the right word to use, or if there are certain things that they're not comprehending? Are there certain tests that we should be asking about for our children?
I think that in terms of tests, I don't want to create anxiety among parents. So what I'll say is
Yeah,
that
we
if
have
you
enough of that
sense
already.
that so if you sense that your child is behind in some way, you should definitely raise the question. And so I encourage parents to keep notes, whether that's digitally on your phone or in an actual physical notebook, and write down the date and the thing you're observing with your child that you're concerned about. And then, over time, refer back to it. And then if you continue to see that issue, continue to jot it down with a date, because I think the date is important. With some of these issues, you'll realize it's not an issue. It goes away. The thing you were worried about is no longer a problem. So you don't need to bring that up at the next child visit. But sometimes you may sense, for example, that your child isn't speaking as clearly as other kids their age, or as clearly as perhaps an older sibling or a cousin or someone you're familiar with. So you have by far the most experience with your particular child. And so I think parents should honor those concerns that they have and write them down and then bring them to the pediatrician. And then I think it's the pediatrician's job to be able to communicate to you why not that particular thing you're experiencing is an issue. And if it persists and it continues to bother you, then I think you should seek referrals to specialists and get more information, because again, that doctor's just having this limited encounter with your child, whereas you have all of this experience with them. So honor your instincts, seek support, and definitely get second opinions if you have a concern that's persisting.
Yeah, I think very helpful advice. Now, I want to go a little further into that before I go back to something else that you were talking about regarding the digital aspect of things. But when you talk about seeking a second opinion, I'm curious, like, are we talking about, or how can we differentiate between going to a speech therapist or going to a reading specialist, and how can us as parents, or maybe even an eye doctor, optometrist, as to sort of make sure the kids are doing what they're supposed to within that age range? What or how do we go about looking for that specific help that we need as parents?
So I'm not sure where your audience is located geographically, but in the United States, for example, there are early intervention programs that serve kids from birth to 3, and they're federally funded. So every state has one. They call them by different names, but Wisconsin, where I am, it's called the Birth to 3 program, and so parents can get a referral to get a range of diagnostic tests done through that service. But even without a doctor's referral, parents can go online, find the information, and sort of raise their own hand to get those services and supports. And they often use a system where there is one person who does these diagnoses, and then based on the results, then you'll get referred to a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, or there are even kids who need to do food therapy. Because when you think about reading, and writing is also an important part of literacy too. There are motor skills involved. So kids can have challenges with speech, they can have challenges with movement, they can have a range of things that ultimately affect reading. So I do think that early intervention, like when kids are 3 or younger, is super important. And then after 3, in most areas, you're able to tap into these additional resources through the public school system, even if your child isn't enrolled in the school. It's just part of what you have access to.
Okay, so just to finish up on that, what can parents search for online in their state, wherever they are, and maybe if they're
So
not
I would,
located in America?
okay. So I would search for early intervention services near me. Is sort of the search terms I would use. And the goal of those programs is to help meet kids' needs before they manifest in a reading challenge. So
Right.
reading challenges often won't emerge until kids are older. And there are a number of reasons why kids struggle to read. And so I also think it's important for parents to keep those 2 buckets of things we talked about earlier in mind. If your child can understand what you're saying, or if you read a passage to them and they can understand the characters and the story arc and they understand the words, then it's like, okay, it's not a language comprehension problem. This child who's smart and capable and understands language is struggling with matching those sounds to the print. And to your point earlier, sometimes it can be a hearing issue. Sometimes it can be an issue discerning the different sounds within speech. Sometimes it is a vision issue. I was talking to an optometrist about this recently because he felt like people weren't thinking about that early enough, that some kids just need glasses. And then all of a sudden, those squiggles on a piece of paper are sharper and they're able to read. But then there are also learning challenges. There can be memory issues. There can be attention challenges. But you want to sort of begin that process. And it's sort of like solving a mystery, right? You have to follow the clues. I think you have to document the clues, and you have to feel really comfortable asking a range of people questions. So ask your pediatrician questions, ask other parents and parents with older kids, like, where did you go? Like, have your kids experienced anything like this? Have you heard of anyone who's experienced anything like that? And you'll get some referrals to community resources and specialists that you never would have thought of. And
Oh, for
then,
sure.
ask teachers.
That was a big one. Yes, asking teachers, asking the school, I think is important as well, because that is one of the centers for most of our children. So to go to places that have already dealt with it, like you're saying, parents, I think is really important. I remember with with one of my sons, when he was about 9, 10 years old, he's about 5th grade, going through some things related to ADHD, and we were told to read to him to help with comprehension. And that sort of helped with his imaginatory way of thinking as well, so that he can sort of bring things into his own perspective. We were told not to let him read, but have him listen. And that being something that was so helpful to him. And he's come a long way since then. That's really been something has been beneficial. I'm curious if you could talk about that, of parents reading to kids at night. And
Yeah.
obviously not just regarding the bond and what that does for the child, but I think regarding, like we're talking about, looking into the future regarding their reading capabilities. I'm curious if you could talk about, or if there are some pointers regarding making sure that we're doing that correctly within the home.
Yes. So the first pointer is start early. So whatever age your child is, start today. And again, it's just to give them that experience of hearing the language, of learning words. There have been numerous studies that have found the words that are in even picture books tend to be more sophisticated in terms of grammar and vocabulary than the words most parents speak back and forth to their child at home.
Mm.
Because if you think about it at home, you're saying things like, set the table for dinner, be quiet, sit still. You may be giving directions more than having like really rich dialogue back and forth where you're introducing new words or describing places or climates or terrain that they're not familiar with. So start early for that reason. Also start early just to get in the habit of it. Don't limit your talk to what's printed on the page in the book. So definitely read the story, give them that experience of being immersed in it and beginning to understand the beginning, middle, and end of story arcs and characters and plot and all this, but also ask them questions. Asking questions is a really powerful tool for parents. It creates that pause where they can think and have that invitation to connect what you've read with things they've experienced in their own lives or things they've heard from other books or read. So asking questions, try to do it consistently. I think that often we hear 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day. Some people even advise an hour a day, which isn't realistic for 98% of families, right? So I say start small and establish the habit. So with just 5 minutes a day, you as the parent get in the habit of taking responsibility. Like, we're going to read these 5 minutes no matter what. And so you're going to have books around. You're going to find the time, whether it's bedtime or it might be at breakfast for some people. They could have breakfast story time or listen to an audiobook in the car or, whatever the scenario that works for
I
you.
love
But
that.
start small and build the habit. And when they get into it, they'll listen for longer than 5 minutes. Sometimes 5 minutes is all that's appropriate for your child's attention span.
And sometimes 5 minutes is all the parents have, and that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's about getting to those into those habits. I think is so important to making sure that we're starting the process of doing this. Now, I'm going to take a little break over here from this question, even though I have a lot more things I want to get to. And I don't know, there's a part of me that's like, I'm hearing you talk about this, and it's obviously been something that you've been doing for a long time. You've been passionate about for a long time. Can you just talk a minute or two about where this topic specifically has been something that has built up so much passion inside of you, and how this is something that you've turned into being an advocate for literacy in our children?
So I think this path for me began when my parents named me Maya. So they named me after Maya Angelou, who's an author and a poet. And so that just gave me the sense that writing and reading were really important. So I think this journey starts with just my parents valuing reading and
Mm.
writing and school and education and all of those things. And then when I became a mother in 2011, I wanted my daughter to love books and reading and writing just as much as I did. And I, at the same time, was reading a lot of news articles that said kids were really struggling. Kids across ethnicities and socioeconomic background were really struggling attaining basic reading proficiency, and that there were particular challenges among Black students. And so as a Black mom, that didn't sit well with me. This idea that some kids were being labeled as behind when they're entering kindergarten. It's like, if there are these expectations for what kids should know about the alphabet or about reading at kindergarten, then someone needs to take responsibility for teaching parents those things, like in a very organized, systematic fashion, starting with your prenatal classes or, in the hospital after you've given birth. You get all this information on car seats and you don't get anything about literacy. So that's where it began for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think most of the passions that we have come from us being parents. And I think it's something that really sits with us. And it becomes a 24-hour job, not in the sense of we're always on, but just something that's always on our mind. And it's something that's always there. And okay, how could we we create a better world for our children, which is I think what you're talking about, and especially when you hear things regarding the challenges that that we might face in whatever circles we may be in. I think there's something to be said about a parent asking a question, right? That's what we've been talking about today, of what can I do, and then fill in the sentence from there. So as a parent, and obviously, in today's day and age, there's obviously so many opportunities for electronics to be in our kids' lives and our lives as well. And I'm curious, well, I guess the good place to start is, what effect long-term does screen time come into play regarding reading and itself?
I think it has an extraordinary impact, and largely negative. So I think the first way technology is causing challenges is parents' use of technology. So parents, because we are so addicted to our phones and we've allowed our phones to be the source of like all kinds of information. So in the morning, I look to my phone to know what time it is, to know what the weather is, to know like which prescriptions I'm supposed to take that day. And, all these, just my life, it's so much of that information is centered on my phone. So from a baby or toddler's perspective, your face is glued to that phone. They don't know what you're looking at in there. But when you're looking in the phone in a way that's different than if you glance at your watch and then reconnect with the child, we're taking our eyes and our attention off of the kids, and we're modeling for them this kind of immersion in devices. So that's one, as parents, we have to be mindful of our own technology use. Then two, we see more and more parents just handing devices to really young children. And oftentimes it's well-intentioned. You have to clean the house, you have to cook, you have to do your adult things, and you think that this app or this thing you have on the device is educational. Research indicates that for the littlest ones, like those that are 3 and under, they're not learning much, if anything, from this swiping. The things that they're learning are not the things you think they're learning from the educational app. They're learning to crave the kind of sounds and special effects and things that are coming off of the screens. They're, swiping and tapping. They're learning to use voice commands to get the information that they seek, as opposed to reading. So I think there are a lot of downsides to it, particularly with the youngest kids. I do think there are some productive educational uses of technology as kids age. I'm a big audiobook fan for the reasons that we were speaking about earlier. It's a wonderful opportunity to immerse kids in story and build vocabulary and background knowledge about things that they wouldn't get otherwise.
That makes a lot of sense. We actually, I think one of our first episodes of the podcast, we had on the founder of an app called Carrots and Cake, where if a child is able to eat their carrots, then they could get their cake. So when they have a healthy amount of the things that they need to do regarding their homework or piano lessons and stuff, and they sort of check off the boxes, and they can prove it, then they're able to get their cake. They're able to have their fun time to create balance, which is, I think, something that you're talking about of doing that properly. Have there been, besides for audiobooks, are there possibly any specific games or measures that are beneficial to the literary world when it comes to helping our children learn to read and comprehend better?
There are some technologies being developed that they sort of support students who don't have the parent or teacher or adult to sit there with them and teach them some of the things that they need to know, just about things as basic as the sounds that certain letters and combinations of letters correspond to. I don't have a list of ones that I would recommend to viewers right now, but I do think that we are getting to a place where there are some technologies that can be helpful to support reading practice for kids that don't have an adult. I think for parents, like, your lap is the best app. Your back and forth responses, you sharing what you know, all of those things are best. And in situations where there isn't a parent to teach some of these things one-on-one, there's not a teacher who can do it because they've got 30 other kids in the classroom, then I think there is a place for technology, but it has to be a place of supplementing.
I remember growing up, which is something I don't see it anymore, is you had follow along, CDs in the back of the book that you would put into the CD player, and you would follow along. I remember growing up with that. And as you're talking, like, I don't know if my kids have that, even if it's a USB. I'm not sure if it's something that is actually out there right now. But I think that's, the concept of using technology properly. And to your point as well, there's a fascinating book. I know I've talked about it here, written by Adam Alter, Irresistible. Who talks a lot about the concept of technology and how it's something that we have to learn how to balance properly. And he actually had a study in there talking about kids being able to hold on to the messages that they're seeing on screens. And it's crazy numbers, somewhere like less than like a week or so of being able to retain those informations from, and it could be good messages about saying please and thank you, and from the shows that that are out there. We're not going to give names just because each to their own for what they actually are. But one thing that really stood out to me for what he was saying, and to your point of less than 3 years old, he said from the ages, I think it's about, I'm paraphrasing here, so I apologize if I'm really messing this up, and I'll check it up, and if I have to make a correction, I'll bring it in over here. But I think it's from the ages of like 5 until about 7 or 8, or even a little bit older than that, when a parent sits there with a child and watches what they're watching with them, and then pauses and says, you saw what they did, you saw what those puppies did, and how they thanked each other, they gave compliments, and they apologized. That's something that we can do in that type of situation when we do something by the dinner table, and then we talk about it. Then the retention of that information becomes much more realistic, and something that can be much more lasting. Now, the problem with that is, and something that I actually emailed him, but I never got a response back, is that's great. Most of us are putting something on for our kids to do so we could do other things. Now you want us to sit there when we're doing those things. So doesn't that sort of take away for what the purpose of what a lot of these things are? But I think the answer is that there has to be a balance, and it could be, time. And this is something I talk about as a therapist and in my office, not just here on the podcast, of looking to spend time with that person. Like, the slogan that I like talking about is, how do we like our kids as much as we love them? And sometimes it could be a little bit hard. And I think being able to have situations and doing things with our kids that they want to do is important. And for a long time, I was very reluctant to ever give any sort of guidance regarding, go see a movie or go have a show to go ahead and watch together, because I always felt like, what's the connection? What are you doing if you're just sitting and watching? But I think if you take that type of opportunity of watching something, and it doesn't have to be a documentary, it could be a regular movie that, that is out in theaters now. But if it's done in a way where there's conversation made about it, then obviously that could be something that could be helpful. Going back to the TV show, it works the same way. So having and sitting with your child and watching some sort of child show, from Sesame Street to Dora the Explorer and anything else, and being able to sit there and say, oh, you saw what they did, that's something that you do. Or you saw the way they helped their mommy, maybe that's something that you can do as well. And that's where I think that information can be. And I think, like you're saying, having that communication, that is really, really important, and making sure that we're doing that. Bringing it back to this conversation of the electronics in general, I'm curious if there are certain times or places that it could be something that could be detrimental. Let's say whether it's right after school, or let's say when they're studying for a test and having to read a book and having to look at a screen as opposed to a physical page. Are there certain things that us as parents should be staying away from when it comes to electronics? Not saying harmful or bad or throwing it under the bus, but just regarding like a guidance of being able to say, oh, these are the things we probably shouldn't do because of A, B, and C. What would those things be that we should be staying away from in general?
I would say with technology use, to the extent possible, avoid it first thing in the morning and before bed. So there's just a ton of research about how sleep is disrupted by the screen, just the glare of that. So again, if you absolutely, like, you can't spend that time right before bed reading aloud, I do think that is an opportunity for an audiobook, because you don't have the glare of the screen. And it doesn't have the interactivity. There have been studies with little kids and ebooks where just the mere fact that it's on a tablet makes the child think there's all this functionality, even if it's just meant to be a book, like where you're turning the page by swiping or tapping. The kids are pressing all kinds of things there. It's like they're almost consumed with the device, because they're thinking there must be more to this than just this text. Because again, in some cases, kids think the story is coming from the picture. And so they're looking for some sound effects. They're looking for all these things. So I think audiobooks just remove some of the distractions and overstimulation. So definitely lots of research suggesting don't give them the tablet or the device right before bed. It messes up sleep. And then in the morning, I recommend that people stay away from it because it just sets the wrong tone for the day. Like, I think you want them like out and moving. You want them getting some sunshine and outdoor time if possible. You want them making eye contact with, people who live in the house and talking conversation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's something that every parent has to know what's happening within their home and how to deal with it. It can be a babysitter, and it can also be something that could be detrimental, and it could be something that is not going to be of help in the long run. So, a parent knowing how to do that, but I think staying away from the mornings and the evenings as a child is getting ready for the day or winding down, and that probably applies to us as well as adults. To be as conscious about what's happening there. Now, talking about the actual books themselves, what advice would you give to our parents that are looking to navigate the plethora of titles and different subjects out there when it comes to finding the right books for the age-appropriate child? How would you say, and where can parents look for some guidance in that?
Yes. So I definitely think that there are books that are more or less appropriate for kids at certain ages, and it's not necessarily about the content within the book, although that's part of it. Sometimes even just the format of the book. So I think parents have to understand that kids are learning so much, particularly young children, from just the physical aspect of the book. So a board book, as unsophisticated as it feels to hand them these thick cardboard pages or whatever they're made out of, it is building important motor skills and, that act of turning the page. And then if you're sitting with them and you're pointing and dragging your finger across the text, they're learning about just the directionality of print. They're learning that an English text runs from left to right and it runs from the top to the bottom of the page. And those are important lessons that support reading and that start before kids are paying any attention to the letters necessarily, but by using your finger to point, you're bringing their attention in line with yours. And it's okay for them to throw the books and chew the books and, flip them all around when they're little. Like, let them explore the books and enjoy the book in that way. So that's like an age appropriate way to explore a book. Babies are really interested in faces. And so another thing you're trying to cultivate is just an interest in and motivation to handle and interact with books. So even if you make a little family photo book and you put a picture of mom and dad and brother and sister or grandma, whoever, and they're just flipping through looking at the faces, there's something to that I think supports literacy. And then the conversation around it. So you want things that they're interested in. You want things that they can handle physically. You want, for babies, you want books with character names, that's the most interesting thing I learned from research. This idea that kids pay more attention to stories and they use eye tracking studies and different technologies to follow this. And they don't know the why. They don't know the reason exactly. They don't know if it's because the parent does something different in their voice that captures the child's attention when they're reading books that have a character name, like Lola in the library, or Pat the Bunny. The two characters have names, and there's just something about when the character has a name that the child tunes in a little more.
That is amazing. I didn't realize that. But you bring up a really good point regarding the eye tracking. I know that's something I've done with one of my kids, and I think there is a norm per age for how the eye is going to move within the line and within whatever it is that they're reading. Every child is different. I know one of my children, we did some of this testing, they were going back over double what the norm was for their age. And it was through going to a optometrist and getting specific glasses that really helped the concentration to be able to track properly and because of him wanting to go back and find the word before just to make sure he was comprehending, it was messing with the comprehension. So you would think sometimes going back would be better because I'm going over again, but it was hindering from him being able to attach the word from the word that was coming next. So by just being able to eye track and seeing that going back sometimes could be detrimental to the comprehension, I think that's a really, really good point. And obviously knowing that, okay, so at this age, this is what they should be doing, and understanding a certain level of what our role is as the kids get older, right? So then you have series of books. You have books that maybe parents might not have been, I guess you could say, age appropriate for them when they were that age, but times are different and things are a little bit different today. I'm curious to how parents can navigate that tension that might come about when a child wants to read something and a parent may be a little bit reluctant in letting them do so?
So in this regard, I am, within reason, your own, family ideas about what appropriate content is, but I'm fine with my own personal daughter. I'll give you an example. The school librarian, the girls are in sixth grade. They were having a book club. They had selected a book, and the school librarian emailed the parents to ask for our permission. Like, is it okay? Like, there's some content in this book that you might find objectionable. And I thought was
Wow.
a email I was never expecting to get. And I was like, what in the world could possibly be in this book? And then without reading it, I decided, one, I trusted the school not to have anything crazy in the library. Two, if I said no, that would only make her want to read it more.
Yeah.
And let's read it and have a conversation about it, because the subject matter, in this case, there was like some, I think maybe some violence, or I don't remember the specific title, but I was like, let's have that conversation around it. And because these are obviously things that kids that age are interested in and reading about. But when we're talking about younger kids learning to read, I also think if they're interested, even if a book is harder than you think is at their level, I said, let them try and support.
Yeah.
Read with them, explain the words, give them a physical copy of the book and download the audiobook so they can kind of look at the print while they're hearing it. So I think there's so much competition for reading that if your child wants to read something, let them read it for the most
Yeah,
part.
that's a very good point. And I think the way it was put to me, I remember when coaching a educator that I really looked up to regarding this topic is, you want your kid to reach more than to pull. So give them the book that is a little bit above what you might think they're comfortable with, or maybe they're comfortable with, but everyone else is reading it, so therefore they have to read it, as opposed
Yeah.
to sticking to something that, they might read in school or from, their oldest sibling that was a little younger, but they're a little more advanced. So like, "Ugh, I already read that, or I already know that book." And therefore they're pulling more than they're reaching. So I think to your point of when a kid is really determined, they'll find a way to read it. And I think kids are very resilient, and anyone that has kids can sort of know that they're going to get what they want in that sense. So, resisting or sort of putting a barrier is just going to make them want more. And I think that's a very good point. But there are some other challenges that come about as well. Sometimes you have language barriers when it comes to reading, or you have children that are growing up in, let's say, bilingual homes, there could be just time constraints, obviously, that come about. What whether it's techniques, advice, or support would you offer to someone that is wanting to have more in the home, or maybe not even wanting, but are not even aware that they want to have more, and just looking to have other ways of kids learning and getting more inside of them than just having a screen? What would you recommend for those parents?
A parent who's trying to get their child to read more.
Yes, yeah, and there are other barriers that are coming to this.
I think sometimes it's really helpful to think about reading in community, particularly as kids get older, even school aged. So my daughter, I remember her transferring to a new school and getting really into a series of chapter books. So, they're simple, but they look like more sophisticated books for the kindergartner than a picture book, and they can read them independently. But they were called the Owl Diaries, and there were a series of them. And her little friend group, they would read the books and they started trading them amongst each other. And so because it was almost like their little informal book club, and there was this element of familiarity also with the characters, they knew what to expect because it was a series. They were familiar with the setting, and I felt like it lightened the comprehension burden for them. So I think there are two kind of different lessons there. One is around kids like to read series for that reason, because there are parts of it that they're familiar with. So it lightens the cognitive load so they can pay more attention to the novel aspect. So like what's different in terms of the plot or the scenery when the characters go on a vacation, or so let them read things, even if it seems repetitive, even if it seems like light and they could read something harder, they're still getting something out of those simple theories, even as they get older and they're reading Babysitter's Club or, whatever the new thing is. And then there's also something powerful about them talking about books with their peers.
Yeah.
outside of the classroom or, their parents dictating something. And I think that encourages a lot of kids. My daughter's reading now some books because her friends have recommended them.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And even coming from older siblings, I know my oldest, she was a big fan of Wonder, which I think is one of the best books ever. And I think that's something that, you know, when a younger sibling hears an older sibling talk about a certain book, like, oh my God, that was amazing. That was something that I really loved. The younger one will be like, oh, okay. So when I get a little older, I want to read that book. And even though I think most people that are reading would still say that the reading is better than the movie when it comes out as a movie, I have found, I guess this from my own kids and own experience, is that when they get a chance to watch a movie or something, they want to go back and see and read the book now because they really like the movie. And it could work the other way around as well. So even though I may think like, why would I want to see the movie if I could read the book and enjoy that a million times more? But there could be something out there that could be beneficial when it comes to a kid seeing something, therefore having an association with it and wanting to talk about it. But yet now, now let me go back and read the book. So, I don't know if there's an answer to that, but I'm curious regarding, the being able to have something that may be a TV series or a movie, but it's also a book, how parents can go about navigating dealing with the reading, which is a priority in many ways, or it should be a priority, and making sure that their kids are doing it, but at the same time wanting to go ahead and see the technology or seeing the TV show or movie. Is there something that you would recommend how they should go about it?
I think the TV and movie angles for books are great. And sometimes the child may be introduced to the television or movie version before they've read the book. So you don't have to, if it works for you, do it where you say you have to read the book before you can watch the thing. But if it just organically happens where they watch the show first, then they can get into the book. But I think the key thing is the conversation around it. And you don't have to watch it,
Mm,
especially at this point, they're older. So it's not the point where
right.
they're 4 and you're sitting next to them pausing the cartoon to talk about it. But ask them, well, what's different in the book compared to the movie, or what would you have done? So you want to get to this point where your questions as a parent are getting more sophisticated. So when they're younger, you may focus on more, directional or not, or direct observational kind of questions like, who's that? Where's the hat? Blah, blah, blah. And then as they get older, you can start asking about their opinions, their perspectives. Well, what would you have done differently with casting this movie to make it more like the book? Or, what was better about the book than the movie, or vice versa? And then you want to get to the point where you're asking them also why questions. Well, why do you think the director made that decision about this? I can't remember the name of the book, but my daughter read one series where in the book, the characters were white, but then in the movie, some of the main characters were Asian. And the author was an Asian American, but when working on the book, she felt like the book would have more appeal if the characters were white. Well, that's a really interesting conversation to have about
Oh, wow. Yeah.
choices and, the market and this, that, and, what changed between the point in time when the book was written and the movie came out that made it more palatable to have characters look like what they actually look like in the author's mind. And so I think it's great when there is a visual media kind of complement to a book, and that as a parent, our job is just asking questions.
Yeah, for sure. And now I'm even more curious, Maya, what the name of that book is. Now, just it sounds so interesting, and it's a great topic of conversation. And I love that why question. I think it's one of the most important 3 letters in the alphabets in the world. Just being able to ask that, and it's so important to ask that. And I've talked about in my room as a therapist is, every question is important. The worst question we can have is the one that we don't ask. And I think, when we just put it out there, we make it something that like, why do you think that is? Or what do you think the author's background is that he even came up with a story like this and they had to do this to the character? It creates so much discussion, which is what we want. And obviously that's something that, we can really gain a lot from books. There are obviously so many more questions that I have on this, but, hearing how much of an advocate and how passionate you are about this, I'm curious, are there specific misconceptions that are out there when it comes to early childhood literacy that you've encountered, and how would you address them in general, or how have you been addressing them?
I think one of the challenges is even the definition of early literacy. So there's been a lot of legislation passed recently around how reading instruction should happen in schools. And so there's a big movement toward having more systematic, explicit phonics instruction in early elementary school to lay a strong foundation for reading. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's critically important for kids to get to the point where they can rapidly recognize words in print. We have too many kids that just were never given that skill, and so they've struggled. And so despite their vocabulary and comprehension abilities and all these other things, they can't read because they haven't cracked the alphabetic code. So we definitely need to address that. But I believe, as we've discussed today, I think early literacy starts from birth, and I think it starts with parents. And I think that it is impossible for schools to fully teach everything kids need to know about literacy, and we should not even have that expectation. I think we should understand that the brain connections are happening when kids are babies and toddlers and preschoolers that support language and support literacy learning. And so we have to better educate parents to do our part.
I could not have said that better, and you went right into my next question, so I have nothing to ask at this point on that topic, because I think while schools are great, parents are better. And I think parents need to realize, we need to realize, is that the school is here to help us, not the other way around. And it's not a babysitting service. And as much as sometimes we like to think so, or we wish they were, maybe just a few more hours in the day sometimes as well. But I think overall, just being able to understand that the school is going to do certain things. And I think just the fact that you're talking about a school that your daughter is in that is sort of asking permission about a certain book, I think says a lot about the communication that's there, which is great. And there's a lot that we can do as parents. So if there would be one overall big piece of advice, something that you can have written in the sky regarding making sure that parents are doing their part, what would that be?
I would want to leave parents with one word, which is urgency. So I think parents should take really seriously this responsibility that we have to ensure that our kids have a shot at maximizing their potential educationally and being great contributors and citizens in society. I feel like we have to take ownership of that. And part of the urgency is we have to have an urgency to develop ourselves. So to listen to podcasts like yours or read a book like mine, like we have to be learning and growing in order to create the circumstances for our kids to thrive. And it's just, for some reason, parenting isn't valued enough in society that we have a organized system in place to support parents and teach parents. Like if there were some credentials or something for parenting, most parents would be guilty of malpractice. But we haven't been supported or trained. Like, we had no qualifications for getting these kids in the first place. So I think we have to have like some urgency about trying to be better and not let, fatigue or distraction or all these things prevent us from making the time we need to nurture ourselves so that we can nurture our kids.
Amazing. Yes, those are keywords. Put on your mask first, your oxygen mask, before you put on the mask of others. I want to finish up over here with some rapid fire questions, and we can maybe get some context information from you. Favorite book of all time?
Oh, I love the book Each Kindness by Jacqueline Woodson, which is a picture book. And it's set in a school or you said rapid fire, so I won't go into all the detail.
Okay. Most transformative book you've ever read?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I feel like I've been so transformed by so many books. I imagine it would be...
What will be the first one that comes to mind?
There was a book I think it's called The Good School or A Good School. Oh man, I can't think of the title. It's something like that. But what was transformative was a quote in the book where an educator was saying that if parents understood what was going on in schools, they would intensify their advocacy within schools and the work that they did to educate their own children. So it wasn't so much that book as like that idea in the book.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. And if you get the actual name of the book or the author, please send it to me, and we will post that in the show links over here. Is there a book that you would recommend other than your own, or maybe a person to follow, or a YouTube channel, or a TED Talk that parents can learn more specifically on this topic of helping their kids read better?
This one isn't specifically about reading, but it's about early language development and just about being a good parent in the world. And there's a book called Parent Nation. And I think it speaks to this urgency around the earliest years of kids' life. It's by Dana Suskind at the
Okay.
University of Chicago. So I like that because it just embodies this idea that we have research and evidence to support certain practices. So knowing that, we have to take certain action, and there is a collective responsibility for making it easier for parents to do the things they need to do to help set their kids up to thrive. So it's like not going to work if we individually, if you do what you need to do and I do what I need to do. We kind of need everyone doing all that they can do and to
Right.
get this going. So I
Yeah,
recommend
that collaborative approach is key. Last question for you. If you can think of an everyday mundane superpower that you can have as a parent, what would that be?
patience.
Okay,
Is
enough
that
said.
kind of
Yeah,
the
that is great. Okay, Maya, this has been absolutely amazing. Where can people find you, and how can they get in contact with you?
My website is mayasmart.com. So that's MAYASMART.com. And I publish a weekly newsletter that gives parents practical tips, recommendations for seasonal picture books or family literacy activities to do outside. So that is a great way to stay in touch and get ideas. We all need ideas and support.
Oh yeah, we do. Well, Maya, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.